Before we begin, we encourage you to please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for more information on educational videos like this one. Today, we're going to delve into a significant subject, women's reservation. Have you ever pondered on the necessity of this topic in our society? This isn't just about gender equality. It's about reshaping societal norms and political landscapes to ensure that women, who make up roughly half the world's population, have an equal voice in the decisions that shape our world. Recently, this subject has been at the heart of several debates, particularly in the present social and political climate. It's a matter that to the overall representation of women in leadership roles, in decision-making bodies, and in the corridors of power. In this video, we'll discuss the arguments in favor of women's reservation, the points against it, and even take a look at how the rest of the world approaches this issue. So, are you ready? Because this is a journey that's going to enlighten and challenge your perspectives. Let's dive deep into both sides of the argument. Many advocate for women's reservation, citing numerous reasons. Let's delve into some of these arguments. First and foremost, the call for women's reservation is rooted in the need for gender balance in decision-making bodies. It's no secret that in many societies, men have dominated these spheres for centuries. However, in the name of fairness and equality, it's essential that women, who make up about half the world's population, have an equal say in decisions that affect everyone. Women's reservation is one way to ensure this balance is achieved. Then, we have the argument of empowerment. Women's reservation can serve as a powerful tool for empowering women, particularly in societies where gender inequality is prevalent. It provides women with opportunities to participate in politics, governance, and other influential roles, thus challenging traditional gender roles and expectations. It's not just about having women in power for the sake of representation, but about giving them the platform to contribute their unique perspectives and ideas. Lastly, the need to overcome societal biases and prejudices is another strong argument in favor of women's reservation. Despite progress, stereotypes and biases against women in leadership positions persist. These biases, often ingrained from a young age, can be hard to shake off. Women's reservation can help counter these biases by normalizing women's presence in traditionally male-dominated spaces. Over time, this can help change attitudes and perceptions about women's roles and capabilities. But the case for women's reservation doesn't stop at these arguments. It also includes the potential to bring about positive societal changes, such as improved policies on issues like health, education, and social welfare, which often get more attention when women are part of decision-making bodies. Clearly, there are compelling reasons to consider women's reservation, but what about the other side of the argument? On the other hand, there are those who argue against women's reservation. This camp believes in a pure meritocracy, where positions are awarded based on ability and qualifications, not gender. They argue that reservation policies could sideline the concept of merit, leading to a scenario where less qualified individuals are chosen solely because of their gender. This, they claim, could potentially undermine the quality of leadership and decision-making in various sectors. Another argument against women's reservation revolves around the concern of tokenism. Critics worry that reservation might minimize the genuine achievements of women, as accomplishments might be attributed to the policy rather than their own abilities. This could inadvertently belittle women's contributions and reinforce stereotypes, rather than breaking them down. There are also concerns that reservation could deepen gender divisions. Instead of promoting gender equality, critics argue, it might heighten the sense of us versus them and further entrench gender stereotypes. They believe that the focus should be on creating equal opportunities for all, irrespective of gender, rather than setting aside positions for a specific group. Furthermore, some critics worry about the potential for misuse of reservation policies. They argue that influential families or political groups could exploit these policies to maintain or enhance their power, thus defeating the purpose of the policy, which is to empower the underrepresented and disadvantaged. Lastly, there's the argument that reservation is merely a band-aid solution to a much deeper problem. Critics argue that the real issue lies in societal attitudes towards women, and that's where the change needs to happen. They believe that the focus should be on education and cultural change, rather than legislative mandates. However, it's important to remember that these arguments are not universally endorsed, and there is considerable debate on their validity. As with any complex issue, the reality is nuanced and multifaceted. It's evident that the issue isn't black and white. There are valid concerns on both sides. How does the rest of the world view women's reservation? This question opens our exploration into the global perspective on this issue. Around the world, women's reservation, or the idea of gender quotas in political representation, isn't a foreign concept. In fact, many countries have adopted different measures to ensure gender parity in the political sphere. For instance, Scandinavian countries, often hailed as leaders in gender equality, have long been utilizing quotas to ensure women's representation in politics. Then, we have countries like Rwanda, a shining example of women's political representation. Post-genocide, Rwanda implemented a 30% quota for women in decision-making roles, leading to a parliament that is now over 60% female. This makes Rwanda the country with the highest percentage of women in parliament worldwide. Contrast that with India, where women's reservation is still a contentious issue. Despite being one of the world's largest democracies, India ranks 148th out of 193 countries when it comes to women's representation in politics. The Women's Reservation Bill, proposing a 33% reservation for women in the Lok Sabha and state assemblies, has been pending for more than 2 decades. Global studies suggest that gender quotas don't just increase the number of women in politics, but also influence public attitudes towards women leaders, and can lead to changes in policy. A study from the World Bank found that quotas can bring more women into politics, but the success of these measures often depends on the specific cultural, historical, and political context of each country. There are also contrasting views. Critics argue that quotas can lead to tokenism, where women are included merely to fulfill a quota rather than based on merit. They argue that this could potentially undermine the quality of political leadership. In conclusion, women's reservation is not unique to India. It's a hot topic of debate globally, with countries adopting various measures to ensure women's representation. However, the effectiveness and acceptance of such measures vary widely, influenced by the cultural, political, and historical contexts of each nation. The debate on women's reservation extends beyond our borders, making it a truly global issue. What does the future hold for women's reservation? As we gaze into the crystal ball of the future, many factors could influence the course of women's reservation. Let's explore some of the potential trends and developments that might shape this landscape. First off, technology is a game changer. With the digital revolution, we're seeing a new era of gender equality in the virtual realm. This might translate into more opportunities for women in areas traditionally dominated by men. While this doesn't directly address the issue of women's reservation, it does broaden the scope of opportunities for women, which could impact the need for reservation policies. Next, societal changes could also play a critical role. As societies become more progressive and egalitarian, we might see a shift in attitudes towards gender roles. This change could potentially decrease the demand for women's reservation, as gender equality becomes a norm rather than an exception. Yet, it's equally plausible that the push for women's reservation could intensify as societies strive for more equitable representation across all sectors. Political movements too can significantly influence the trajectory of women's reservation. If we see an upsurge in feminist and equal rights movements, there could be a greater push for women's reservation. Equally, political shifts towards conservatism could lead to a rollback of such policies. It's also important to consider the role of legislation in shaping the future. Laws can either enforce or dismantle women's reservation, depending on the prevailing political climate and societal attitudes. Finally, let's not forget the role of education. Greater access to quality education for girls and women can level the playing field, potentially reducing the need for reservations. However, this is contingent on addressing the deep-seated biases that often limit girls' access to education in the first place. So what does the future hold for women's reservation? It's a complex issue intertwined with societal, political, and technological changes. It's a topic that demands continuous dialogue and thoughtful consideration. While the future is uncertain, the conversation around women's reservation is sure to continue. We've explored the pros and cons of women's reservation, but the debate is far from over. We've journeyed through the compelling arguments for women's reservation, highlighting the potential to correct historical injustices and promote equal representation. On the flip side, we've also delved into the arguments against it, touching on concerns about meritocracy and the risk of tokenism. We've cast our net wider to understand the global perspective, observing the varied approaches and outcomes across different countries. And then we've looked ahead, considering the possible paths to progress. This is a complex issue, with diverse viewpoints and no easy answers. As we move forward, it's crucial that we continue this conversation, staying informed and open-minded. Your understanding and engagement can shape the future of women's reservation and its impact on our society. As we conclude, remember that your voice matters in this ongoing debate. Stay curious, stay informed, and continue to question.